So my brothers and my sisters, as we embrace this urgency of creating the beloved community, now is the time to be love. Love means understanding redemptive goodwill toward all which seeks nothing in return. So be love by implementing the demands of justice to eliminate the school to prison pipeline that has so many black children entrapped. Be love by correcting voting policies that seek to suppress the votes of millions of black and brown people. Be love and implement the demands of justice by transforming a society that is disproportionately violent toward black lives, including black transgendered lives and indigenous lives. Be love and correct false narratives and economic policies that continue to divide and pit poor and working class black and white people against each other. Be love and implement demands of justice where systems and structures are deconstructed and lead the way of living in community that reimagines just, humane, equitable, and sustainable policies, practices, and behaviors. Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them who hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and abuse you. Be love and do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with our God.
Students with King serves as the King Center's flagship engagement platform for elementary, middle, and high school students, highlighting the legacies of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and the impact of the 20th century American Civil Rights Movement. Our dynamic and interactive programming has reached over 1 million students worldwide. Our core learning programs introduce students to the philosophy of Kingian nonviolence, coined Nonviolence 365, and provide important lessons about how they can apply nonviolence in their immediate environments. Whether you're an educator who is looking for ways to bring the King legacy into your classroom, a student who wants to learn more about this powerful moral movement, or a parent who wants to get your child involved in character building and literacy development activities, Students with King is your one-stop shop for unique lesson plans, teaching resources, educational field trips, and other opportunities to engage with the history of the American Civil Rights Movement and its powerful leaders. We look forward to engaging with you and your students. Together we can build the next generation of compassionate, courageous, and conscientious leaders.
Good morning. On behalf of Dr. Bernice A. King, welcome to this month's interactive civil rights panel talk. In honor of Women's History Month, we have a great program designed for you, teachers and students. We are committed to building a beloved community that we have leaders who are willing to bring everyone along. So today, students, we will need your participation. In order for us to have a great program, it needs to be interactive. So therefore, start thinking about the questions that you would like to ask of our guests. Teachers, there's a QR code. I would like for you to take out your phone at this time and scan this QR code, because in there are some questions that I need you to answer that will help me improve this program and make sure we continue to get funds to support it. We want you all to join us and take this pledge to participate. But at this time, I would like to introduce our moderator. Our moderator today is no one other than this great man that I've gotten to know over the years. He's an auctioneer. He's a reporter. He used to work at Channel 5 as a news anchor. So without further ado, Please welcome Mr. Franco.
Thank you, Donald Bullock. Always a pleasure to see you.
And it's always a pleasure to see you. You're looking great and have a wonderful conversation with our guest. I can't wait to hear about her.
Me too. Let's start with this, everybody. Can you imagine being 12 years old and riding with Rosa Parks? Or fighting injustices of housing with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. himself? Well, Mrs. Doris Dozier Crenshaw did this and so much more. She not only saw history, she helped shape it and continues to do so today. Hello, everybody. I'm George Franco, veteran reporter and anchor at Fox 5 News in Atlanta, Georgia, and a professional benefit auctioneer, aka your good news auctioneer, raising millions of dollars for nonprofits doing good in our communities, like the Southern Youth Leadership Development Institute in Montgomery, Alabama, which was founded by Mrs. Crenshaw to train young people to combat inequalities of education and much more. We are thrilled to have her join us at our Students with King Nonviolence Spotlight series. We want to hear from you and what questions you have of Mrs. Crenshaw. Please put your questions in the chat. Include your name, age, school, and where you're joining us from. Right now, let's go to this video to learn more about this remarkable woman.
Welcome to our Students with King Nonviolence Spotlight series. Today we're going to tell you about an amazing civil rights leader who is helping to change the world. Our spotlight person is Mrs. Doris Dozier Crenshaw. Mrs. Crenshaw is the president of the Southern Youth Leadership Development Institute. Mrs. Crenshaw knew from the time she was a young girl that she had to do something to make things better for all people, especially African Americans. In 1955, at the age of 12, Doris served as vice president of the NAACP Youth Council when Mrs. Rosa Parks was advisor to the Youth Council. Mrs. Crenshaw didn't wait to become an adult to start making a difference. She started at age 12. Did you hear me, young leaders? Age 12. Working with Mrs. Rosa Parks herself. And guess what? It gets even better. After completing her degree at Clark College, she continued her community outreach in Chicago with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Yes, the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the open housing campaign. This means she experienced some things that she knew were not right, yet she didn't just sit around talking about them. She knew she could make a difference, and she had the heart, the passion, and the courage to step out and do her part to make the world a better place. In 1977, Doris joined the Carter White House Domestic Policy Staff for the Small and Minority Business Issue Division, then moved on to serve as Deputy Director of the 1980 Southeast Region Carter Presidential Campaign. In the early 1980s, she was Special Assistant to Reverend Jesse Jackson and also served as his Mobilization Director for his special projects. In this capacity, Mrs. Crenshaw worked extensively in Washington, D.C. and nationwide with black businesses for the Push Trade Bureau. Doris then served as consultant to Vice President Walter Mondale and was later named National Political Director for the Mondale for President campaign in 1983. Mrs. Crenshaw was a senior grassroots coordinator for Sphere. She was a senior consultant to Alabama Power Company and is the founder and CEO of the Southern Youth Leadership Development Institute. Yep, you can say it. Mrs. Crenshaw is awesome. Doris Dozier Crenshaw has over 60 years of community activist experience, and she's not done yet. When you hear her awesome story, it will hopefully spark something in you to make a difference and make your community better for everybody. Mrs. Doris Dozier Crenshaw is our spotlight person for this session.
We're back live now. Joining us is the esteemed Mrs. Doris Dozier Crenshaw. Mrs. Crenshaw, thank you for your time, talents, and treasures. We are thrilled in order to have you here joining us with our Students with King Nonviolence Spotlight Series. Now, we've got questions coming in from all over the country, all over the world, really. But let's start with this. 12 years old, you're riding with Rosa Parks. How does a person at that age even connect the dots? And were your parents saying, please do this? Was this your idea? Where did the spark come from?
Well, during that time, during those days, we sat around the table when our parents were talking, and we learned about Jeremiah Reed and other people, that the inequities and the brutality forced on women on the buses. And we heard about all these stories. And I'm not sure, but I think my grandmother's brother was close to Rich E.D. Nixon. And I think that's how Miss Parks learned about me. And we were all around in all the activities going on in the city, my sister and I. And so I was asked to join the youth council. Now, you must remember that in those days, the NAACP was forbidden fruit, to put it mildly. People were afraid to be members of the NAACP. But my parents were not afraid, and my grandmother was not afraid. And so I joined. We didn't have that many members of the NAACP. I always told people that if we had 12 people at the meeting, we had an overflow crowd. So we kind of rotated officers. And so it got to be, I was selected somehow to be it. And I was happy to do that.
And help put history in perspective. Rosa Parks is famous for refusing to move to the back of the bus. In that context, when did you become involved? Had that happened? Was that before that? Was the movement started?
I was a part of it before she was arrested.
That was before that.
That was before that. And then I happened to be on the campus of Alabama State College at that time. And I was one of the youth that they gave leaflets to pass out over the weekend, announcing the mass meeting for December 1st at Holt Street Baptist Church. And then we attended the meeting. And so, we were in. I mean, it was all in at that point.
And Rosa Parks, I keep going back to her because she's such a formative figure in history, as is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and we will move to that direction too. But when it came to Rosa Parks and her position that she took, tell us about the swell of activism and the movement that you were involved in, because we've all seen the historical pictures. There was violence and there was danger.
Yes, there was, but we were not afraid. Rosa Parks had strong faith and courage at that time. She was a woman of few words, but you could feel her passion. And when she talked about the freedom for our people, she emphasized the need for education and for us to be registered to vote. She had a strong compassion for our people, and you could feel that in her. And for some reason, I was selected, I guess because of my office. I traveled around the state with her prior to her being arrested and after she was arrested, and attended the last convention of the Alabama State NAACP chapters.
And when you say traveled around with her, what does that mean? You were going from chapter to chapter? You were going from city to city? You were in Alabama? Where were you traveling to, and what were you doing?
We were in Alabama, and she went around to various chapters, correct, in the state to speak, and I accompanied her on several occasions to those meetings.
What were you thinking as a 12-year-old? What year was this? And what was going through your mind? At 12 years old, these days, kids have phones and they're playing with iPhones and whatever they're doing. But at 12 years old, in your time, the technology wasn't there. The method of communication wasn't there. Your message was falling on deaf ears and you had to break through a lot of barriers. And as a 12-year-old, did you understand that?
I understood that I was committed to doing whatever I could at that age for the emancipation of our people and for what we call freedom and justice. I cannot, I really can't say to you right now from 67 years ago what exactly she talked about, but I know that I was very impressed with her and loved her very much. And I interacted with her mother, and her husband. Raymond.
Wonderful. What a wonderful part of history. I'm so honored to even get to share this with the folks who are watching. And by the way, if you're watching, now's the time to put your questions in the chat box, because I've got tons of questions. I'm always on to the next thing. I just came back from Chicago. I did a benefit there for Brother Rice. It's a Catholic school in the south side of Chicago. And then I learned about this and I thought, oh my God, I was just in Chicago. I'll be going back to Chicago for another fundraising event in about 3 weeks. But tell me about Chicago, because let's fast forward a little bit. You're 12 years old, and then I'm trying to think, okay, how many years passed between you're with Rosa Parks and then at one point you connect with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Chicago, and this is when you were battling inequities of housing. Am I correct in this?
That's correct. But I also should tell you, in between 1955 and 1962, we were involved in all of the movements that came through Montgomery. I was part of the Harry Belafonte's Youth March for Justice in 1958. And then in 1959, the students at Alabama State had a protest, and in 60, that was the sit-in movement. And we were followers of Bernard Lee, who was later became assistant to Dr. King. So, and then the Freedom Riders, we picked up the Freedom Riders when they came to town. So we didn't just stop in 1955 and skip over to 1966.
No, I figured not. I knew there was, that's why I said, take us through that timeline.
Yes. And so I was impressed by a young woman from Spelman named Ruby Doris Smith, who was associated with SNCC. And so I enrolled in college at Southern University, and there was a movement there, and I joined that movement and was expelled from Southern. And my father came and got me and told my mother that he was taking me to Atlanta and I would not be involved in that mess. And so the first day that I was there, I went looking for Ruby Doris, and the first person I met was Julian Bond, who immediately sent me to work with the Student on Appeals for Human Rights.
So let me just back up for everybody who...
knowledge of my father, I was involved with the Students on Appeals and with SNCC, and became a deputy registrar. So we were around with activities for the National Board of the YWCA, and got to be a deputy registrar there, and work with Reverend Fred Bennett and Rita Samuels with voter registration activities. I was sent there by Mr. Jesse Hill. So I was known around there, and the National Board of YWCA sent me to Chicago. They sponsored me like the American Friends sponsored people. They sponsored me to go and work in the Chicago open housing movement. And we went there for 2 years. I spent a summer there, and then the next year I went back, and then I was working with Al Raby then, but then I went back to work with the open housing movement there in Chicago.
Well, let me back up a little bit, because you mentioned Julian Bond, the former ambassador, very well known in Atlanta. His son, Michael Julian Bond, I believe, is currently a council member in Atlanta. And that movement continues, I believe, because of the groundwork you laid down through the King Center, also here in Atlanta. Take us back a little bit to when you came to Atlanta, because you said, did I hear you say you got expelled? I thought I read
Yes, I
that
did.
somewhere.
I got expelled from Southern University.
Because?
In 1962, because I was part of student movement there that was sponsored by CORE and Congress for Equality, I think was the acronym. But anyway, so we went there and we marched down because there were some students in jail there. And so we marched, and then they started throwing the tear gas on us. And they said, well, whatever you do, just keep singing, keep your eyes closed and keep singing. And so when I opened my eyes, my roommate and I were the only two standing there. So I got tear gassed, and I had to go to the infirmary. So they knew that I was a part of that movement. So they closed the school. And then they said, if you got a letter to return, come back. Otherwise, don't come back. So I didn't get a letter.
And how do you feel about that? Because you're standing up for justice and equality. And I guess you could say the system is saying, no, you got to go. But you're not done with your struggles. You continue it. Come here to Atlanta.
Like it was a just cause, and I thought
yes,
I should have been a part of it, and that, you know, we have to be willing to suffer the consequences, and that's what we need to do today. Sometimes we will be ostracized. Sometimes we will be dismissed from school or whatever, but you have to have a made up mind, and you have to be committed to the causes that you feel strongly about.
Well, thank you for doing that, and God bless you for doing that. Truly, you did lay down the groundwork and the bricks of the foundation that have led to people, the young people today, and their ability to have such freedoms. And speaking of young people, okay, I'm asking you guys to put your questions in the comments, because we have people watching all over the country. So there are lots of things and points that need to be made. So, okay, let's go to Chicago. You're have come as a child, and so by now you're a young woman, I take it, and you're in Chicago, and you're with Dr. King there. And tell us about that experience. Then was the movement there, and what do you remember about that?
Oh, I remember working with the SCLC staff, and part of what we did was to go out and pass leaflets and solicit people to come to the mass meetings and participate in the marches, and to hear Dr. King when he came to speak at the various churches. But we worked on recruiting people to become part of the marches, to Gage Park, etc., advocating for open housing. But they were a rough people. I mean, I was very shocked to learn at some of the places we went to that they never heard of Dr. King. That shocked me.
Yes, ma'am.
I was surprised about that.
Okay, so I'm being told that we can read some questions from the audience that's on screen. Okay. I don't see any screens. There it is, from Tesfaya Waktola. Help me if I got that right. How could you combine the civil rights movement worldwide? I think I'm reading that right. How could you combine the civil rights movement worldwide? I don't know where Ms. Waktola is calling from. I believe it's a woman. But what do you say about that? Because other countries are to this day struggling for equalities and inequities. And so what can be learned from what you have learned in your life?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but it's a continuous struggle. And like other countries, we're still struggling in this country. In fact, the hostility and the hatred, and that is as intense today as it was when I was coming along. So I'm not sure what the question, I'm not sure what she's asking.
Yes, ma'am. You
She's
see the
saying, how
question
do
there
we,
too, but I think I understand. I wish I knew where she was coming from, because then we could have a better sense of the context of the question. I have to ask this. Are you a fan? We get on these phones and there's TikTok and social media and Facebook and Instagram, and people have ways of communicating messages so quickly now. And I wish I could say, we all do, that it was always love and nonviolence that the message was, but it isn't always that way. So what's your take on social media and the instantaneous communication we have today, and how it plays into the movement of nonviolence?
well, I'll tell you what, I think that I'm inspired by the young people today and their ability to mobilize people for various causes, and millions of people today. And I think we have, in some instances, we always need more, but I think we have a nice cadre of people, young people today, that are active worldwide. But I think that not only in this country, but people from other countries was very supportive of our movement. And I think they always say that they were very much inspired by the Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott, and of course, our leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and others.
So tell me about your Southern Youth Leadership Development Institute. That's your nonprofit in Montgomery, Alabama, because while you are an important part of history, we are also living in today's world, and that is different. Young people today, do you think they understand the context of what it took to get here? And how does your nonprofit move in the direction that you want them to move, and fight the inequalities, if you will?
Well, we recruit young people who say they want to be leaders, and we have them for a 6-week period in the summer and some sessions throughout the year. I think that they have a quest for knowledge about our movement, and they really do anxious to participate. Most of what we do is write letters and interact with the elected officials here, and we try to talk to them and impact the inequalities in education. And they have a quest for knowledge, and they participate mostly in voter education and voter registration drives, but also into they're inspired to communicate their feelings with the teachers and the principals in the schools today. We also have coding classes and sessions with them, and we also talk about health and wellness, because if you're not healthy, you can't learn and you can't be active. And so we emphasize that. The thing that I'm most impressed about is that students that enroll want to come back, and they are very anxious to get out and to engage their peers and to participate in the activities that we do have.
You know, I think it helped me kind of form this thought, if you will, that as we are growing up, in no matter what era you are from, that young people have hopefully insight and imagination and energy to imagine a better world. And as a 12-year-old, no doubt you had that too. But when you transfer that to today's youth, how do you connect the dots with the legacy of Martin Luther King and the King Center? Because you've been instrumental in that too.
Yes, I would say I've had the great opportunity of working with Coretta Scott King.
I know you have.
At the King Center. And I think her influence was as impactful for me as Rosa Parks. And then I worked with Mrs. King, Dorothy Height, Fannie Lou Hamer, and other women uh, that had an impact on the world stage and this freedom cause that we work in. Now, you said 12 years old. Um, I'm not. I forgot the question.
No, that's okay. I was saying that as young people, there's, I think, a yearning to understand the world and maybe shape it in the form of justice and love that young people see fit. And if there's any parallel to what's happening with young people today and what was you're young as a young person, no doubt that fight for inequality and justice continues. And that's what I was asking about, is how do you connect the dots with today's young people of the legacy from what you came from with Dr. King and Coretta Scott King, the King Center, Jesse Jackson. Oh my gosh, you also were connected with President Carter, and best wishes to him, because President Carter, as we all know, is in hospice right now. I have to ask this. Do you have anything to say to the Carter family right now?
I would just say that my heart and prayers are with them, and that I'm very grateful for his contribution. I had the opportunity to come to the Carter Center and to tell my story there that's in the library, and spoke with him and took pictures with him. And I told him, no matter what other people say, I think he was one of the greatest presidents that we had, and we do appreciate him. I think the people don't know that because of the participation of Blacks at the Atlanta airport is due to our efforts to pass what was called 95-507 that forced the federal government to set aside contracts for minority people. And he elevated the roles of Blacks in his administration to key positions that had an impact on the community. And we all know about his impact on the world stage.
Absolutely.
His fights for the health issues in Africa and the housing issues in this country.
Speaking of housing issues, we started with Dr. King in Chicago. Let me take us back a little bit to that and then fast forward. What were you doing when you heard of his assassination?
I was in New York. By then I was working with Dorothy Height at the National Council of Negro Women. And I was a regional director for something. I forget the title. But at any rate, we were in a meeting there. And she dispatched me she was trying to get me into Memphis. We couldn't get there. So she sent me to Atlanta to advance her for the King funeral. So we were devastated. I mean, it was heart-wrenching. It kind of took us out. I mean, I tell people all the time that I don't think some of us have really recovered from that. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of people whose lives were just, it's kind of like lost in the wilderness, And so that's where I was. And then I remained in Atlanta. And I did go over to the Mrs. King's house to advise her that I was advancing that for Doris Height.
We've got a question now from Della Jones Fried. Ms. Jones is asking, what can students do to get involved?
Where is she from?
It doesn't say. I wish I could say. I don't know.
Well, students can get involved by...
She's from Atlanta. Thank you.
From Atlanta. Okay. One thing is to get involved with the activities of the King Center. And that's easy to do. They have a lot of things going on with students there. And I see students involved in a lot of activities around Atlanta today. So start there. Start with the King Center and what they're doing over at the King Center. I'm not um, aware, but I see all the time students from Morehouse, Spelman, and Clark involved in various activities. I know
Mhm.
that Black voters now it's projects that they can get involved with registered voters and civic activities there. And I
And
think now with the internet, she can click on uh, the King Center website and start from there.
absolutely. And I will speak from personal experience because Mr. Bullock has been kind enough to invite me to be a moderator at the King Center. And when we have King Center with students, we have student days and we have numerous schools come in. So reach out to the King Center. I'm sure they could find a place for you because they always have room to expand the message. Thank you from Kansas City. Kala, do you have a question from Kansas City? We'd love to hear your questions as well. Let me go back to the statement you made, madam, about how some people haven't quite recovered after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. How did the group regroup, if you will? So Jesse Jackson, John Lewis, I suppose yourself, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, there was the lieutenants who were around him. What do you remember about how that group of leaders reconsolidated after such a massive loss?
Well, there were various activities. I remember we stayed at Pascal's at that time, and most of the student leaders and leaders were assembled there at Pascal's, and some of them stayed there for a long time. There was a lot of disbelief, but people walking around talking about he's not dead. That's just fake, and they're just saying that. That was prior to the funeral, but people. I was more involved with Jim Bevel than most of the other people in SCLC. I was around them, and then some of the SNCC people and core people, but I don't know how to quite tell you, but I feel the effects in myself sometimes. Even it was traumatic. I mean, so we were kind of in the wilderness for a while, but then we have to pick up the Bible said, pick up your bed and walk. And so we had to turn mourning energy into work energy, and I think that's what we did for the most part.
Absolutely, and I think fair to say that Coretta Scott King picked up the ball and continued with it in the formation of the King Center, and also, from what I understand, you were also instrumental in the MLK Day as a holiday. Tell us about that. Let me say real quick before
Let
this.
me go back a minute for you. That I was part of a group of women that Mrs. King came to spoke to at Pascal's, and she talked about her vision for the King Center. And I recall her with a little African dress on, sitting on the floor with her legs crossed in the Indian style and talking about her vision. And some of them kind of laughed at her, and they said, well, we don't need brick and mortar. We need to put that money out here and there. But I was really impressed with her passion and her courage in that period. And to see her bring the center into real life, and is still living today. And if she had given that money out to people, it would be gone. But I experienced the hatred that some of those people had for her, and talked to her very badly. But so I became immediately a follower of Coretta Scott King,
Yes,
and I was delighted when we interacted around the country all the time with each other. There was a circle of people, and all of us knew each other, and the various meetings. So we kind of interacted with her a little bit, and I was delighted to be asked to come to work with her. And she said that she was impressed with me because we had a meeting, Jimmy Carter, where they asked me to mobilize people from all over the South to come to Ebenezer Church. And she was just so impressed with the quality of people, the number of people that we had organized to come to that church. And that's why she asked me to come mobilize for the first national holiday.
Well, we in this country are fortunate that you were part of that. So Burkina Faso, we just saw him a little while ago, put up his location. He's from Africa. We also had a worldwide question from Ethiopia. And the question was basically, how can we expand today's civil rights movement to other parts of the world? So somebody's from Africa and they don't have the freedoms that we do here. I have friends, believe it or not, in Eswatini, which is a monarch country. They don't have freedoms there at all. What do you say to people who are watching worldwide, Ethiopia and other parts of Africa, who are saying, how do we do what you did in this country there?
Well, I think people have a misconception that when we organized, that there were a lot of people. We were sent to cities, one person, and we knew one family. And then we start with, so my answer is, start with the people that think like you to work on the issue that you're compassionate about, and then you will get other people. But have the courage and to ask people to join you in your efforts. So that's what I would say. And also with the technology today, you can also connect with people in this country that are doing things. Reverend Barber, right. Dr. Bernice A. King, other people, the NAACP and other people who have impacting, doing the best we can here.
That takes me to a question that just came up. Look at this. Misha Sandledge Smith. What is your thoughts on how the King would feel about today's society? I think she means by that means Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the King. And I was going to ask almost the same question. What would Dr. King say and Coretta Scott King say about today's society?
I think that we've learned that they understood that freedom is a constant struggle, and that we have to become even more committed to combating the evils that's going on in this society, and to make sure that we're not bystanders, but become active ourselves in what's going on.
From Della Jones again, from a 9th grade student, do you believe that students from multiracial groups must work together, and or do you think white kids or other kids have specific work to be conspirators? I'm not sure how to interpret that. I'll let you read that and interpret it yourself too.
Well, we've almost been a movement of a coalition of people, and we always advocate that we want to involve all peoples of goodwill, and we cannot be isolated and just have a Black movement. None of these movements that have been successful. We're only successful if we do engage a coalition of people that have the same idea, same commitment.
And do you think that the instantaneous communication that we have today, do you think that can tie those knots together better? When in your time, you had to go from place to place. You were in a vehicle and you drove from one chapter to another chapter. It wasn't the same thing. We couldn't do this, couldn't do a Zoom thing back then or StreamYard. So how do you think technology can help improve those contacts and connections? get rid of this phone. Oh my God. Speaking of, sorry.
I think that we have a great opportunity today, given the technology. And I think that what we have to do is to make use of this technology to mobilize people to become connected with people that have the same thoughts and aspiration as you in this thing we call freedom movement.
Yes, ma'am. Donald Bullock, you can answer me in the chat. We're now at 10:44, and our folks have some time. Do we have a few more questions? Della asking again from an 11th grade student. Thank you, Della, for being part of this. How do we overcome barriers that are still in place today? Schools and friend groups are mostly segregated, but not always. What do white kids need to know?
Well, I'm sure that you have some white kids that sympathetic with the movement, and I think that white people need to understand. White students need to understand that the freedom of Black people is just not freedom for Black people. It's for all of us. And if you hold Black people down, then you start to discriminate and have all these negative things going on gay people, Jewish people, Hispanic people. And today, that is that movement. That is the same thing that we suffered with. And today, I'm sure, and I've witnessed people from all walks of life want to be involved, and we need to try to get involved with them. And the thing about it is to work those people who are sympathetic with your cause, and
Yes.
then move to the next, and then try to engage more and more people.
And I want to ask people, if you could tell us where you're from and chat real quick. We want to thank everybody for joining us. I wish we had more time. We've kind of come to the point of the program where it's time to wrap it up. But Mrs. Crenshaw, is there anything you'd like to leave the young people with today who have joined us? Any parting thoughts?
Well, I would say Bernice King had started the thing. Now it starts with you. And I think my parting words would be, it does start with you. So we have to look at what you do and what you're willing to do. And we say the committee of one. And so I think that would be my parting words. And to not fear that other people are not with you. Just stand on the courage of your conviction.
Amen. Thank you for your time. I'm going to have to get to Montgomery one of these days, or if you're in Atlanta, we're going to do lunch. It's been an honor. Truly, it has been. Words of wisdom.
So we invite you down to speak to our students.
I'd love to. I'd love to. Words of wisdom, ladies and gentlemen, from a woman who has traveled such an amiable and powerful road in life. Thank you so much, madam. And thank you for watching and joining us today. My name is George Franco, your host today. And let me leave you with the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. Thank you, everybody, and make it a great day. If you'd like to learn more about the nonviolence movement, take a look at this video about Nonviolence 365 online. Thanks, and make it a great day, everybody.
Nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political and moral questions of our time. The need for man to overcome oppression and violence without resorting to violence and oppression. Man must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. changed the world when he demonstrated what could be achieved through nonviolence. Now, you can learn how to live and practice this philosophy yourself through Nonviolence 365 online, an innovative digital experience developed by the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. Nonviolence 365 Online features extensive video interviews with real nonviolence practitioners, including the King Center CEO, Dr. Bernice A. King, King Center certified instructors and trainers, and veterans of the civil rights movement. Explorations of the historic campaigns that helped Dr. King forge his philosophy. Immersive, annotated reading experiences that enhance Dr. King's most influential writings on nonviolence. Custom activities, including quizzes and interactive scenarios to help you practice along the way. Real-world exercises to help you start applying nonviolence in your daily life. Nonviolence 365 is a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, engaging, and acting that leads to personal, cultural, and societal transformation. It isn't just a concept for philosophers or political leaders. Nonviolence 365 is a powerful, practical approach to dealing with conflict and dismantling injustice. Whether it's in your personal life, in your school or workplace, your local community, or a national movement. Dr. King, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and many others sought to create the beloved community, a society built on global cooperation and equity. This wasn't a lofty utopian dream. It's a realistic and achievable goal because each and every one of us has the power to make it happen by committing to nonviolence as a way of life. Take the first step today with Nonviolence 365 Online.
Great conversation we had. I trust it was helpful to each of you. For those teachers and students that did ask questions, thank you very much. And for those of you who wanted to ask questions but just didn't do so, we thank you also. I'd like to thank our moderator and the panelists that served today. Without you, this would not be possible. Students, remember, take the pledge. You are a part of this beloved community, and we want you to continue to make a difference. Teachers, once again, there is a survey. I ask that you take the survey. We also will have this recording sent out to everyone so it can be shared. For those of you who was not able to log on during the live stream, we will have this sent to you so that you can enjoy the conversation. Once again, thank you. And please sign up for our new self-paced NV365 experience. Once again, on behalf of Dr. Bernice A. King and the entire staff, thank you for joining our Civil Rights Interactive Talk.